How's this for ironic? A museum dedicated to a flood had to close temporarily because of a flood.
Certainly, there is an irony to it. I think everyone is aware of the destructive force of water.
The Johnstown Flood Museum in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, tells the story of the devastating 1889 flood that made the town famous. More on that in a minute. The 2025 Johnstown Flood Museum flood wasn't quite as bad. Shelley Johansson from the museum tells Inside Edition Digital,
There was a leak in a valve that was directly caused by the extreme cold. And essentially what happened is that the water was spewing out, and as things tend to do, it happened in the middle of the night. No one was there. And most of the water went down a drain, but enough of it went onto a wall and kind of leached into other parts of the museum. So basically what we are dealing with is things like wet drywall, carpet, and things of that nature, which is like, these are things that have to be mitigated and dealt with. It's unfortunate, but it could have been a lot worse.
It'll be several weeks before the museum reopens, but fortunately,
absolutely nothing of historic significance has been affected. The Flood Museum's archives, which include irreplaceable papers, documents, objects, all kinds of stuff related to the flood and that history, was unaffected.
That history of the 1889 disaster is a doozy.
Essentially, the flood was caused by the failure of the South Fork Dam.
The dam and the lake it held were owned by some of the wealthiest men in America.
A group of businessmen calling themselves the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. And these were people from Pittsburgh, industrialists from Pittsburgh with names you know. People like Henry Clay Frick and Andrew Mellon and Andrew Carnegie. People who thought, the idea of coming out here in the summer to escape the industry dirt and heat, to stay in cottages and a big clubhouse they had up by a reservoir, that was really appealing.
The dam's owners did little to maintain it. Over time, it weakened, and on Memorial Day weekend of 1889, after a heavy rainstorm, it broke.
The amount of water, I think the figure is something like Niagara Falls for 20 minutes. Is kind of a visualization. The amount of water.
Johnstown was several miles downstream. When the enormous wave of water and debris swept through town, it leveled everything in its path. Over 2,000 people died.
The official figure is 2,209 victims.
The disaster stirred up a lot of class anger.
This was sort of the first explosion of anger against the robber barons of the age. Previously, you couldn't really name them, you couldn't really be mad at them because the power imbalance was too great, right?
And much like the Titanic of a later generation, the disaster inspired songs, stories, and movies.
It became the second largest story of the 19th century, the first being the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, of course. It's a really interesting story of American history. And another piece that is really interesting is how quickly the town recovered and how resilient the people were. And that part is really moving and amazing, how quickly the town banded together.
Today, the history of the flood is part of the fabric of Johnstown, a Rust Belt community that is reinventing itself.
The story of the Johnstown flood endures. It will continue to be a story that captivates people and that interests people and that draws people's interest to Johnstown.
This is Inside Edition Digital.